Right, you've made it to the final video of the Analytical and Critical Framework series. I think it's fitting to end this particular class with an example of what this framework looks like. In fact, your second assignment for this week is to follow this process. I'm going to give you a prompt in In-Class Writing 5, and what you will do is exactly what I'm about to show you, and you will submit 2 documents. So let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to navigate over to a Word document here. Now, this is what I'm calling a contextual list. This is just a rough document used so that we can begin exploring thoughts, engaging in the micro and macro level of analysis and putting it on paper. So this is not going to be the actual written response, but this is going to be more so just a worksheet, if you will. It's going to be a reflection of your thoughts as you're going through this framework. So you have a prompt. The prompt here, why is there such a disproportionate difference in autism diagnosis rates between US and South Korea? Now, this particular prompt is a research question that was used from a student in a previous class of mine. So you'll definitely notice it's very specific, goal-oriented, research-oriented. We will learn about how to do that when we start looking into research in the last third of the class. But for the purposes of this example, just know that it's a prompt. It's just a topic. It's an idea. And what you need to do first is engage in the macro level of analysis. So what you need to do is navigate over and conduct some background research on the web. You can look at multiple sources. You can look up periodicals, you can look up websites, you can look up specific data points. The idea is for this general background research to provide you with a gist of the topic, an overall understanding, to be able to look at some of the things being discussed, some of the common issues, some of the elements that comprise that situation. This is the broad bird's eye view understanding. After you do that, you can engage in the micro level of analysis, which is what we're going to do now. This is where we ask the question, what are the elements of this situation? What are the contextual elements? What are the ideas, the sub-ideas, sub-components? This can get very, very, very specific, very detailed. I'm going to show you just a basic example so that you understand and can conceptualize how this works so that you may begin doing it for yourself. So when we're looking at this particular topic, it's clearly about mental health. We're looking at autism, and specifically we're looking at diagnosis rates. So some of the concepts that you'll see when you conduct background research are concepts related to mental health, clearly, and also, diagnosis rates, maybe the differences in diagnosing autism between the two countries. And then maybe also when we talk about mental health, we start thinking, again, being dynamic minded and critical and analytical minded, we start thinking about maybe even some cultural factors. So we're looking at comparison here, a cross-cultural comparison of two countries, the United States and South Korea. And we're looking at a Far East Asian country versus a very typical Western country. And so what are some of the cultural things that come to mind? We're looking at being a Western culture, we're very individualistic, which may change the approach in seeking treatment or availability of treatment or stigma of that treatment versus a culture that's very collectivist. Let's do that. That might impact the situation some. And while we're talking about those cultural factors, something that comes to mind, and these are all ideas you would see when you're conducting background research. These ideas would pop up, these are coming to my mind, stream of consciousness. But just assume that you're looking information up online, you're writing some of these things down. These can also be things that come to your mind also. I mean, this is your list. There's no right or wrong answer. This is how you are making sense of the topic. This is you engaging in critical thinking, in the micro level of analysis, but it will require you to have a general understanding of the situation. So we're talking about individualistic culture, collectivist culture, so a culture in which everyone is working for the greater purpose of the whole. And in those Far Eastern cultures like that, sometimes there is a stigma regarding mental health. Usually relates to the concept of saving face, or it's a very respect-driven idea. It's a mentality um, that one doesn't reach out or solicit help for something that would inhibit their ability to learn because it's cultural. And so that's another thing that's coming to my mind immediately here. Also, when researching this, you'll notice that the diets between the two different cultures are vastly different. And so I'll just say diet, nutrition. You'll find that the South Korean culture is rich in rice, grains, seafood, whereas our Western culture is completely the opposite. And so those things have an impact on the cognition and on the mental ability. And so these are all just very different but related items at the same time. Try to break that topic down into as many of these items as you can. When I say stigma, I immediately think of fear. That's something that will pop up. Something else that might be a factor in this is a difference in medication use or medication acceptance or acceptance of medication. The list can go on and on and on. And this list that you're seeing is, in fact, the micro level of analysis. And you can then start looking at these concepts. And you can do as many as you want. You can do as few as you want. I would try to mimic this list right here when you submit in-class writing 5. But we can clearly break these down into some similar categories, right? We can break this down into cultural factors, such as saving face. We can break it down into dietetic factors. And then we can also break this down into several other factors. So difference in diagnosis rates, or let's say diagnosis process, difference in medication use. So these would be the overarching categories. Then we can start narrowing this or make it as a funnel. We can take these ideas and just look at them, examine them, see how they're similar, how they're different. But if I were to write about this in a response and say, why are there such a disproportionate difference in diagnosis rates, I would try to group these items into 3 different categories. So group all of the similar items together: cultural factors, dietetic factors, medical factors. So these differences in diagnosis process and difference in medication, I would say difference in cultural medical practice. If I were to respond to this, I can then take these 3 general ideas, and that would be the content of my response to this prompt. So the micro level of analysis is driving the content, and it's the way that you can conceptualize, see the different elements of the situation, draw comparisons, contrast. But usually what you're doing is you're creating a list, you're looking at all of the items and looking for trends, looking for categorical trends. What are the similar items in this list? How can you group this list into 3 different groups, or into different groups that you can then write about to keep everything united and consistent? So that's the idea. I know this is a very rough, basic example, but it's just to show you how to do this on paper. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Don't get nervous about it. Remember, to engage in the micro level of analysis, you have to engage in the macro level. So you're going to have to do some background research, learn the details of the prompt that's given to you, learn what's being said about it. And then when you have those details, you will already have some of the items in this list, and then maybe you can add your own. And then what you're going to do after you complete this list here, and it can look like this. You can bullet point it. However, I just want to see how you're breaking down the topic to the different subcomponents. That's all I want to see on that document. So you'll submit that, and then you'll submit your response, your written response, in proper APA format like normal and in-class writing 5. Both of these are in-class writing 5. You're just submitting 2 documents. And then your response, of course, is going to be a reflection of what you came up with in this list here. It's not as complicated as it seems. It's all your process. You have complete ownership over the process. It's just a way to start practicing critical thinking and analytical thinking in this framework. If you have issues with this or you need help, let me know. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to maybe walk through this with you, but try to take a stab at it yourself. Remember, all of the things we talked about with regards to critical and analytical thinking. You've got to stay dynamic minded. You have to stay active minded. You have to be able to explain in detail, break the situation down into all of the relevant components. And so you have to kind of keep gauging and keep engaging in those ideas simultaneously. Give this a try. Give it a try and see how you do. I did include a few notes here. These are just some basic notes regarding writing and formatting. I'm just going to breeze through these. Remember that an essay and a classical essay format, or any writing assignment, that when you start getting to a page or more than a page, you need to make sure you're adhering to a classical format. That's one that has an introduction or an introductory paragraph, a body with body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Typically, the introduction and the conclusion will have a thesis statement. We are going to practice this in more detail with upcoming writing assignments, but essentially the thesis statement tells us exactly what you're writing about, how, and why. And it's included in your introductory section, and then normally in the conclusion you circle back around and restate that in some way. This is just a note. Just try to do an intro, body section, and a conclusion for now. Remember to keep all relevant ideas isolated to their own paragraphs. All ideas need to be contained in paragraphs of similar thoughts. All paragraphs should have topic sentences that state what you're going to be discussing within that paragraph. Here is a note on thesis statements. Thesis statements tell us exactly what will be addressed in the writing, why, and how, and such a statement should be specific and include all relevant details. We will have plenty of practice with this. I just want to put this up here as a frame of reference so you can see it, because our writing assignments are going to start gradually growing to be a little bit longer, a little bit more complex as we do more writing, do more work. An example, and this is a very professional, research-oriented thesis statement. In fact, this is a thesis statement from a research paper based on the idea we just looked at. The disparaging difference in autism diagnosis rates between South Korea and the United States is based on cultural, dietetic, and nationalistic factors, all of which lead to variance in definition and treatment of autism. So we would know exactly what's going to be covered in a research paper after reading that particular thesis statement. We know the translation to actual real-world practice. We know the main groups of elements that's going to be discussed. It tells us everything we need to know. So it's good practice to begin putting a thesis statement in anything that you write. It doesn't have to be this complex right now, but at least tell us what you're discussing and why. And the how would be the different categories you're breaking the paper up and covering and analyzing through that paper. All right, I'm going to leave you with that. The reading is going to be Models for Writers Chapter 2. That's reading actively and critically. And then the in-class writing 5 that I just mentioned, Analytical and Critical Framework. I'm giving you a prompt regarding the Church of Scientology. The prompt and actually in-class writing 4 and 5 are both due by Tuesday, 2/22 by 12:30 p.m., so the start of class. Remember, in-class writing 4 is going to be one document. That's your response to what you think critical thinking is, your perception of critical thinking. In-class writing 5 is what we just discussed. It's 2 different documents, your context list, contextual analysis list, and then your actual written response to the prompt in proper APA format. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to help. Hope everyone stays well and healthy.